Hello, everybody. This is Teza, going solo again, because Carter's off the hook. You know, people have to be comfortable with what they do, and I'm very comfortable sharing from my heart with anyone who's listening, hopefully offering some comfort, some insight from another person's perspective. I'm not famous, I'm not acclaimed, I'm just a snowflake in the midst of the snowstorm of humanity. But each one of us is so unique and so different. And Carter is not really into being a podcaster, so he's off the hook these days until we have him as a guest once again, or we go traveling, which we will be soon. We will be traveling. So I wanted to talk about being comfortable in my skin, in your skin, being comfortable with being a human. Right now, especially, there's so many challenges I sense by my interactions with friends and also on social media and reading the news and, which I don't watch the news because I don't want to hear that much. I just want to know what's going on and not be ignorant. There is a great amount of uncomfortability and dissatisfaction. And I can relate to that because I have felt that way, but I do not feel that right now. So perhaps my vantage point will be interesting to some of you, and perhaps not, but here goes. So being comfortable in one's skin, accepting what is going on as being okay, even if it's hell, even if it's being in prison. And I have been in prison, folks. And believe me, when I was in prison, I was not okay with it because I had not learned how to be comfortable in my skin no matter what was happening. When I was thrown into prison in a country where there was a lot of injustices, truly, not what we're talking about in the politics of America today, but a third world country where you just were thrown into jail if you blinked the wrong way. And I spent 3 months there. And it was very unnerving, and I thought I would probably die there because there was no hygiene. And I started really thinking I had been abandoned by the world. Nobody was coming to my rescue, which I was hoping would always happen, but never did. So what did I do? I just paced. And in those days, I was a smoker. I paced and smoked and paced and smoked. I did not have access to my usual comforters like booze or drugs or sex or misbehaving. I was in prison. So I just smoked and paced and smoked and paced. And I decided to start writing out my life because I thought I would not get out of that prison alive. And I didn't want to just think, wow, my life has been for naught. Here I am stuck in a third world rotting stink hole for a crime I did not commit and nobody thinking I'm innocent. So I better just make an offering to this wonderful blended family of humanity, I call it today. But in those days, I just thought nobody will know I ever existed except my family and a few friends wondering what happened to her. So I started writing. And just recently, it's been 50 years since that happened. Just recently, though, I had the courage to burn those journals. I call them my jail journals. I kept thinking, oh, that'll be such a wonderful source of material to go back and see what I wrote. But it brought up too much anguish and too many feelings of uncomfortability to go back to that place, even though there was probably some juicy memory stuff in there. But I figure whatever memories I have now, these are the memories I want to work with and to cherish and to share with the world through my books, through my podcasting, through my mind stillers on YouTube, through whatever I can, by meeting people with a smile instead of a grunting, disturbing whiningness, which I hear a lot of people doing these days. So I offered up to the universe those 5 spiral notebooks, journals, and I watched them burn and retrieved the wire spirals from the fire, and I'm using them as a memory, and perhaps I will incorporate them into a work of art because I like to do things like that. So speaking of memories and being comfortable in one's skin, I had recently read Carl Jung's book, his autobiography that he wrote right at the end of his life, just about 3 years before he died at the age of about 83 or 4. He started this project with the help of one of his acolytes, because he was a well-known person by that time, world famous. For those of you who don't know Carl Jung, definitely look him up. I think it's a C.G. Jung is how he usually goes by, but he was a disciple of Freud, who was acclaimed to be the father of psychology, but that probably started way back in ancestral times when people were wondering, like, who are we? And they started writing scripture and started transmitting their connection to this magical trip that we're on called existence. But Jung was very special because he had a falling out with Freud about spirituality. Isn't that interesting? Freud was just a hardcore, well, he also got into coke addiction, as was very popular those days in Europe before the rules and regulations came in the early 20th century, regulating the use of cocaine and things like Coca-Cola and Coca tea, Coca wine, all sorts of interesting ways that people were using coke besides just the substance. And everybody knows that Sherlock Holmes was a figment of the imagination of the writer, Conan Doyle, but Sherlock Holmes was a coke addict. So it was just fashionable in those days for people who had a restlessness to imbibe in coke. So Jung was not that person. He was not a drug person, but he was very interested in the inner life, because as a psychologist and as a disciple of the earliest studies of what makes people tick, he wanted to explore the possibilities. So he did, to his best abilities, go in to himself, go into the interior part of himself, in between giving world lectures and writing books and being a professor and having a private practice. You know, he had a very understanding wife, and they had children. I think they had 3 or 4, and he was a householder. So he was a full-bodied person, but he took it upon himself to say that this is a very important part of being alive, the inner life, not what's happening out there with the world or the government or the wars or squabbles or discoveries or of inventions, who's got the latest this and that. And, you know, he knew all that too, and he acknowledged it. He dealt with people who couldn't, because schizophrenia was one of his specialties and addiction was one of his specialties. And he was an integral part in the beginning of what became Alcoholics Anonymous in America. That's such a beautiful story. It's a little side story, but quickly, the founders of AA wrote to Dr. Jung, who lived in Switzerland at that time, and said, well, we hear that you've been doing a lot of work with alcoholics and drug addicts and schizophrenics, and we need your help. So we're intelligent people, wrote Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, who were the founders of AA back in the, I think it was late 30s or early 40s in America. And Jung wrote back and said, in order to overcome any addiction, whether it's to food, to drugs, sex, or just, you know, being an exercise addict, you have to substitute a positive addiction, and the most important positive addiction there is to have a spiritual connection to life, to have what came to be called a higher power, whether that is this or that, and whatever is person's interpretation of that meaning, a higher power, something that is bigger than yourself. And that is the spiritual life. So in this book, Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he shares with the world, not that he purposely kept it until the very last book that he wrote, but he thought he was so busy helping people that he did not think about writing how he came to be so interested in the spirituality of himself, and in order to help people too. He really went into it in depth throughout his scientific studies. He considered himself a scientist, not a mind explorer, or like people today are called seekers or psychonauts, or people who are on this journey to expand their consciousness. Really, Jung thought of himself as a scientist, and he was exploring this part of his humanness as a scientist and noting it, and in specific ways of art and commentary. And the Red Book was the result of that. If anybody has heard of the Red Book, I was gifted a copy. I can't wait to dive into that when I have time. But even the paintings, Jung never called himself an artist like I do. I'm an artist and an author and a spirit activist. That's what I call myself. That's my role in life. He called himself a scientist. Purely from the scientific point of view, he explored spirituality as the essence of his being, and in his experiences with all his customers, clients, patients, however you want to call these people that sought his help, he determined that the spiritual life was the key for anyone who had disturbance being a person, being alive, whatever their problem was. So bringing that to the here and now, my life, your life, the people's lives who are disturbed and the people's lives who are not disturbed, how does one get in touch with that spiritual part of our life and still have energy to do the dishes and go to work and make the beds and feed the kids and walk the dog and keep abreast of the news so that you don't feel out of touch, but yet you remain detached, and a healthy kind of detachment so that you know what's going on, but you are not a victim of this emotional seesaw where you feel like life is just so unjust. So Jung's book, Memory, Dreams, Reflections, helped me so much. When I finished reading that, and believe me, it was a tough read. I recommend it to anybody, but you have to be a dedicated reader, because some of the pages I had to reread because they go deeply into profound thought. And it starts off with him remembering a dream he had when he was 3 years old, for God's sakes. 3 years old. And the man at 83 is sharing it with the world that this was the first sign of what was to come in his exploration of who he was and what his relationship was with existence, his role, his purpose. Now, when he was 3 years old, he did not understand the dream. It was all images, of course, as dreams tend to be. They're not like written directions. They're usually visual images, and some of them are just a mishmash of your brain sorting out the happenings of the day so that you don't freak out with so much going on in your brain. But Jung came to believe, as I believe, as many people believe, that many dreams are what is called prescient message dreams, profound aha moments that happen when our conscious mind is tuned out and we're in that state of unconsciousness, which is sleep, but yet there's always consciousness, connection going on. And we are not just these individual little snowflakes. We are all part of this blizzard of existences and humanity in the case of human beings, and planet Earth people in the case of this is where we are. And for whatever else is happening out there and in other arenas of the cosmos, I can't say. I have not been there yet, but I do believe that consciousness, as Jung came to believe as he studied more and more, is the key to what is going on here. Consciousness. Not your achievements, not how important you are, not how many followers you have on social media, not how many friends you have or how many parties you get invited to or how many clothes that you have with a designer label or et cetera, et cetera. It has nothing to do with the material world. This consciousness thing that comes and speaks to us through our dreams. And when we awaken, we know if we had one of these dreams, that is a message dream, we know that something's happening that we don't know about, that we cannot define, that we have to just accept and relax and enjoy. And there are so many things in our lives that we do have to accept and relax and observe. And that word enjoy, okay, yes, you can enjoy existence even if it is seemingly unjust or mysteriously confusing or obfuscated because of lack of information. You can still enjoy being alive because you're alive. You're not dead. You have this feeling of breathing, of sensing, looking at the sky and feeling so big when you look at the sky. And if you're in a prison cell, you can't have that privilege, but you can imagine it. You can pretend that there's a blue sky up there. And I know this because I used to teach empowerment techniques to young girls who were in prison. That's my book, In the I, the me, myself, and I type of I. So the memories of our lives is the accumulation of who we are, and that's what we are right here, right now, the accumulation of all our experiences, all our memories, all our choices. And the same with what's happening out there in the world, whether it's, something that disturbs you or something you're into. Either way, it is the accumulation of everything that has happened before this very moment. The swinging of the pendulum, the thises and the that's, the choices and the extremes and the maybe sometimes not paying attention. Like, just look at the environment situation. Crises is a big word, but it is a crisis. It is an environmental crisis that we're in. Anybody knows that who has a scientific thread of interest in their lives. Just do some reading, do some researching. It's pretty easy to understand that the world is crying out for help. It's like, people, stop shitting on me. Stop polluting me. Stop using so much and polluting the atmosphere and the rivers, etc., etc. And I've known this since I worked as a botanical illustrator at Harvard University, started hanging out with all the earth scientists, the geologists and the climatologists and the biologists. Everybody knew when they started measuring the CO2 content of the atmosphere that we were headed for trouble. I mean, not even talking about the oil being depleted one day. I was aware of that when I was a little kid. It's amazing we still have oil, because I remember vividly in the 50s when we were being taught how to get under our little desk for an air raid a practice drill, because everybody was afraid the Russians were coming. And so we actually, everybody who went through this era knows this. They can tell you we had air raid drills for a nuclear attack. And so along with being afraid of the Russians, we were also being told oil was going to be depleted in 30 years, folks, little kids to me. In what grade was that, second grade or something? And 30 years went by, and another 30 years went by, and we're working on the third 30 years, and still we have massive amounts of petroleum products, and we continue to dirty up the air and dirty up everything. So it is a crisis. But just like the environmental crisis is happening as a result of all these experiences, all these, I would like to say, people not caring. I mean, people just didn't pay attention. The scientists were, because that's their job. And then we started having the extremes starting, the people who even became eco-terrorists, the swinging of the pendulum, people who went way, way overboard, instead of just being rational and very methodical about stop buying so much, stop using so much. Our world does not depend on how much stuff you have or can purchase or can boast about. It has to do with your inner life. How connected are you to the truth that lies within your very being, your soul? And I would like to think that that has been my journey. That has been the purpose of my sharing with being an artist, being a writer, being a podcaster. It has always been to share the importance of the spiritual life. And that's why Jung is so important to me. And that's why at this moment I'm talking about how important it is to not ignore the past and all the decisions and all the experiences and all the happenings, not just in our own personal life, but in the world itself. This moment here is not the end of anything. It is just a continuation of all the choices and experiences and happenings that have occurred to, yes, each one of us snowflakes, but also to individual organizations and institutions, and in this case of America being in such a divisive time and people being fearful instead of hopeful. It's happening because of all the previous experiences, decisions, radical extremities, and this is where we are. And it's okay. It's not just okay, it is wonderful, because we are in a sea change. We are in a place, it's like a crossroads, where individually every one of us gets to choose. Am I going to freak out, or am I going to be like in awe of this change that's happening, this transformation that's being forced upon me for some people, and other people seeing that the change is radical. And I mean all the stuff that happens when a government decides to just completely rebuild itself in front of our very eyes instead of behind closed doors, with using the methods of decision-making that have been put in place for centuries through documents, like constitutions and protocol and all that stuff. Everything's being thrown out the window. We are in a state of radical transformation. And each one of us individually gets to choose, am I going to freak out? Or am I going to say, yeah, I can handle this. This is good. This is transformation. And just hold tight and see what happens. I did a whole podcast about it on the previous one. The whole episode was about really just relaxing and letting change have its way instead of having opinions or judgments and unnecessary negativities, because it just blocks the creative force when we allow ourselves to go into a negative spiral, an emotional kind of paralysis. That's what happens when we say to ourselves, this is wrong, this is bad, it's just not right. That's of course a choice for everybody. I mean, I just said it's a curse instead of a choice. Did you hear that? That's funny. That was a Freudian slip. It is a curse for somebody to decide that what is happening is all wrong, all bad. That is a curse. But if you can change an attitude, if you happen to be that kind of a person who you think it's all wrong, it's all bad, as so many people do who are disturbed right now, instead of having that judgment that it's a curse, maybe you don't think it's a blessing, because that's the other extreme. You can just look at it as it is a result of all these previous decisions, historical moments, radical shifts in social and cultural and every other way, consciousness, economic, etc., etc. It's radically swinging back and forth. We're not in a depression. We're not in a time of affluence. We are here right now, right at this moment in 2025. Today happens to be St. Patty's Day. I am not wearing green. Oh, wait, I've got some teal on. But, the shift that happens with each decision is the reason that we in our personal life is right here, right now, sitting wherever you are, listening wherever you are, or walking, or wherever you are, driving your car, or in the forest, or on a park bench, or every decision that you have made in your life is where you are. It brought you here, right now. And the same with society or the outside world. It's a result of all the decisions and all the happenings and all the memories. And this is just a moment in time, my fellow snowflakes. It's a moment in time. And we are passing through, and then more decisions will be made and more experiences will be made. But to have the best opportunity for there to be some semblance of joy and acceptance, we have to just relax and not let our emotions get carried away with all the negative things, the worry, the shame, the blame, the accusations. We can't let that happen. It's hard work to be happy. It's not easy. I mean, I basically work tremendously hard to offer up the thoughts that come into my mind that disturb me. And as soon as it comes into my mind, I've learned the best trick is to just pretend I'm like a priestess in a temple, and I take this disturbing thought and I offer it up to the divine consciousness that I believe we are all a part of. That is the source from where all snowflakes come. All of us people that are so idiosyncratically different, we are all from the same source. We are all from consciousness, and it is sacred, and it is all eternal, and it will never change. That is the consistency of existence. The planet may fall ill, terminally ill. The planet is going to survive, but the people living on the planet, like little parasites living on a fur ball, your dog having its fleas, and the plants having their aphids. We are like little parasites living on this ball of life, Mother Earth. We are going to probably go through some radical changes, and whether we survive or not is going to be seen in the future. But I maintain a positive outlook. I maintain, like Christiana Figueres, who is one of the persons who really worked hard for the Paris Agreement, for the UN. She now has a wonderful podcast called Optimism and Outrage. If anyone is worried about the state of the world, please check out Christiana's and her friends' podcast. All we can do is stay positive and stay creative and stay in the state of joy as much as you can, even though it seems ridiculous, or call it contentment. That's a better word. Joy sounds too silly, and even happy sounds a little frivolous, but contentment. And spiritual teachers use the word equipoise, and Buddhists call it the middle way. To stay calm, to not get negative, to not let yourself worry. When worry comes into your mind, offer it up to the divine. Let the divine that runs this show, call it the higher power, or call it God, or call it the source, or call it Om, call it the chi, whatever you feel comfortable calling it, the breath. You know, I feel really sorry for atheists in a time like we're going through these days. If a person calls themselves an atheist, they are adamant that there's no higher power. So what is the point? Well, all the people I know who are atheists are really freaked out right now, and really, really angry and very frustrated. And it's hard for them to even get through the day without being negative. You know, it interferes with their work, it interferes with their friendships. I know this because I have several friends who are atheists, and they share with me what's going on, and they ask me how I think about what's going on in life, and I share with them, and they all say, wow, I wish I could feel that way. I wish I could feel that way. Well, folks, you can. It's a choice thing. I remember when I came into sobriety 40 years ago, and I was told it's a choice thing. I don't have to pick up that glass. I don't have to smoke that joint. I don't have to take that pill. I have a choice. I can sit with my feelings, as uncomfortable as they might be. I can learn to be comfortable in my skin by just accepting the fact that sometimes uncomfortable things are for a reason, because I'm supposed to change. I am paying attention those 40 years ago to the uncomfortableness inside me, because I had lacked a spiritual life. I had lacked the faith that all is well. I had lacked a feeling of hope and was a victim of despair. And that, my friends, was my choice back then. And when I was told, when I came to ask for help, and thank you, Dr. Jung, for influencing AA and helping all the other people in the world who want to change, who don't want to die of addiction, whatever your addiction is. I was told I could choose to not check out, to not numb my feelings that day, that moment, that second. And then I could make another decision the next moment, the next day, and choose to not numb my feelings out that day, that moment. And day after day after day, I learned how to do that. And little by little, decision by decision, I embraced what I call a happy life, a contented life. And I learned to accept what is. Now, that doesn't mean I checked out of participating in my responsibilities. I actually had, when I was an angry person and I just refused to pay taxes and I refused to vote and I left America and I was a pirate in the Caribbean and I ended up in jail. So my story is pretty much a radical explanation of how one is forced to change or you die. And a lot of addict type people, we are faced with that decision. And we end up being very grateful. You hear it in recovery circles all the time. I am so grateful to be an addict. I'm so grateful to be a recovering person because I was pushed to the brink of death. And then I realized I could choose. I could choose to not die. I could choose to accept life as it is and realize that life is not just filled with fairy tales and gumdrops and bubble gum. And there is some hard stuff in life because there is day, there is night, there is evil and there is good. There is hope and there is despair. There are all these things. It's not just one. There is a duality. There is man, there is woman, but there's all sorts of in-betweens. I know that. I myself have been not accused, but I remember, excuse me, I was walking in San Francisco in the early 70s when that was the gay capital of the world, and two gay guys were behind me. And I had a skirt on, and I had not short hair, but I was rather big. I've always been very tall and very muscular. And I heard these guys saying, "Well, is it a boy or is it a girl? What do you think?" And I've had that a lot in my life. People wondering, what am I? Well, I am a mix of everything, as we all are. Some of us are just not fitting into any form. And we make choices. We make choices to either go with one way or the other. And I've had to make that choice. And I made a choice to come back into the world of reality. And I made a choice to not get out of my skin when it started to be uncomfortable and to sit with my humanity and to go with the flow and to see that existence is a trip. Sometimes it's just amazingly, euphorically beautiful. And other times it's really tragically cruel. But it's always shifting and it's always changing. And just hang on because it will change. I've had several people in my life commit suicide. And my feeling is always such sadness that they couldn't hang on for when it would change, when the despair changes and you crack through and see the light. And I'd like to end with this thought that came into my mind just now about Jung's sharing. And many of you might know that he was the person who really explored what has been called the shadow, the dark side of our humanness. Even in our own personality, our own ego, our own existence, everyone has this darkness that is called, in psychological words, the shadow. And when we deny it, we are kind of stifling the ability of our consciousness to expand, to accept that life is filled with some difficult things in order to experience the majesty of being in the light, to understanding the magnificence of being alive, you have to accept the shadowy parts, the dark parts, and not deny them, not ignore them, and just recognize that they are there. Doesn't mean you have to dance with them. It just means to accept. By accepting the shadow, you see the light. The light does come in through the cracks. So accept the shadowy time in your own personal experiences and in what's happening in the world. Accept it because it is changing, and we will soon be in a different way, a more expanded way. And let your creativity be nurtured. Let it thrive by being positive, giving that energy to just acceptance. That's being positive. Don't waste your life force by being negative. That's a very, very bad way of choosing. And you're also choosing to kill your spirit and to kill your happiness. Why would you want to do that? I hope you choose to open to the light that's cracking in through this dark, challenging time that we're all going through, whether it's your own personal life or if you see what is happening out there in the world as being a darkness. It's not the end of the world. It's just a shift. It's just a change. And I hope you're feeling a little more comfortable in your skin after my sharing with you. I hope so. Until next time, my friends. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya.